autumn of 2022, Culturopolis, a conference co-organized by the Culture Institute of Barcelona and Culture Action Europe, brought together researchers, cultural workers, artists and policymakers to exchange ideas and work around cultural rights.
During 4 days of discussions, presentations, workshops, and artistic programming, participants from near and far gathered to discuss access, cultural practices, innovation, creativity, and much more.
I'm Maya Weisinger from Culture Action Europe.
And I'm Marco Fiore from Michael Culture.
Welcome to our 4-part series that explores the current discourse and practice around cultural rights in our communities across Europe. Today's episode focuses on participation and communities. Who is being left out of the experience of culture? What is the cultural sector doing to improve the situation? We ask these and other crucial questions to the people from across the sector who are looking critically at the various conditions that affect the right to participate in the city's cultural life, as well as the various forms of cultural participation.
Come with us to discover more about what these professionals had to say. Thursday morning. I'm setting up a row of chairs, anticipating the throng of people soon to arrive at Parallel 62. It's 8 a.m., and the damp, cool air of the Barcelona morning hits me, thrusting me into high gear. I'm ready for the day. I arrived late the previous night and took the bus, headed to El Raval, the neighborhood where Culturopolis had already kicked off. On the way in, I saw slivers of Catalonian streets, little corners of buildings and neighborhoods, the bits and pieces of what makes this city special. But this morning, I'm inside, approaching the day with fresh eyes, and I'm excited. I'm in Barcelona, in a beautiful theater, here to learn, here to share, here to connect with people who care and fight for cultural rights all across Europe. I feel lucky. I've entered a space, an opportunity and a conversation that not everyone has the same access to. But that, of course, is exactly what we've come here to talk about. The room starts to fill with the smell of coffee as I hear the cheerful "Bon dia" ping-ponging around the room. It's time to begin.
Alexandra Xantaki radiates an aura of respect. I understand well why she was chosen for the opening ceremony of the conference. She is the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights. Her work focuses on cultural rights of minorities and indigenous people, cultural diversity, cultural heritage, and multiculturalism and integration in international human rights law. On stage, she takes the microphone, and you already know that she will say something straightforward and wise. When we ask her to share with us some of her thoughts on the work she is following on cultural rights, especially how it relates to marginalized communities, she accepts very willingly. The first thing I ask is how cultural rights should be approached by international organizations when interacting with specific communities.
Universalism means that we all share the same values and the same human rights, the same human rights values. But the way these values are expressed is up to the communities and up to the individuals. So, I cannot go to a culture and tell them, what to the people that I think are, whose rights I think are violated, to let them know that their rights are violated. It should be the opposite way. We should treat them as adults and give them the chance to identify whether they feel oppressed, whether they feel that their rights are violated. And if they do, then of course we're going to be huge allies in their fight. But I think that for a long time, this idea of cultural relativism has been used and still is used as a smokescreen in order to limit and restrict cultural rights. So, and when it comes to international law, we have to keep in mind that international human rights law has the tools to deal with balancing of human rights.
Because this work finds itself in delicate situations, where cultural rights of a group could restrict other human rights, you have to find a good way to frame the conversation. as Alexandra stresses, and you do that by active participation. You also have to face the opinions of different countries.
Very often, we have states that, as I said, that refuse the recognition of cultural rights on the basis of these arguments. This is not the way human rights work. We recognize collective rights, collective cultural rights, and of course we recognize, let's say, the rights of women, and then we try to balance the two, and we try to listen to these women and try to find ways to maintain both the cultural rights of these women, but also respect their rights as individuals and as women.
And in all of this, we need to maintain a critical gaze rather than a blind application. Which is why we ask Alexandra where cultural rights and environmental rights cross their path. She touched on this topic during her intervention in the panel. How can cultural and environmental rights cooperate to be more impactful in the lives of people?
Culture, the way it is interpreted, the concept of culture means, first of all, tangible culture, secondly, living culture, so the practices, etc., and then what we call natural culture, so the relationship individuals and communities have with their environment, with their land and their environment. So this is where the right to environment crosses paths with cultural rights, and there's a lot of overlap. We see very often that the relocation of local populations means that their cultural rights are eroded. We see very often that in development projects, states or multinational corporations do not respect the vision of local populations, and this vision may be a different vision. So, the way development is interpreted is part of the of cultural rights of individuals and communities. And so I think that the right to environment has a lot of communalities with cultural rights, and that's why I work quite closely. In the last year, I've been working quite closely with the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to environment to specific complaints that have come to us about violations and erosion of cultural rights in decisions that states have either taken or allowed multinational corporations to implement on specific lands.
Alexandra's years of experience working on human rights issues is not lost on me. It really seems as though she has seen it all. I'm glad that when Marco interviewed her, they could talk about what changes in perspective she has seen in the field of cultural rights, especially in the countries in the EU.
I have seen a paradox. I have seen some states becoming more aware and more interested in cultural rights and taking initiatives to maintain and protect cultural rights. You can find mainly at the local level, at the level of local communities, like local authorities. And unfortunately, I have seen several states that have become much more restrictive in the way they understand culture and are trying to ignore cultural rights of people who do not belong in the mainstream. But at the same time, I see Barcelona. Look at the Culturopolis. We are here in an amphitheater that is full of people and full of representatives of the state and local authorities. So this is an amazing event, but also this gives me a lot of hope and a lot of joy.
Alexandra is also preparing a special report that will highlight how much cultural rights are guaranteed to people who have been forced to leave their country of origin. In particular, she is focusing on the different stages, from their arrival in the country to their integration. Imagine traveling constantly, seeing new cultures and understanding how much work needs to be done so that everyone is in a position to freely express their identity. In these travels, Alexandra has come across interesting examples.
One of the best, and it doesn't have to do with migration, but is a fantastic example. I have come across Maori, the indigenous peoples of New Zealand, in New Zealand. So a Maori dance based on a song by Beyoncé. So this is a traditional practice that has been put together with the mainstream popular culture, and we have thousands of these examples, but we need to have more. So it's not about migrants doing something to be integrated. It's about the state taking measures so that their cultures and their viewpoints and their philosophies infuse the society. And by this, the society itself becomes even more creative, even more innovative, and all cultures develop further.
An infusion of cultures. As someone who has recently immigrated to Europe herself, it's comforting, heartwarming even, to hear Alexandra talk about the importance that our creative expression plays in our integration story of finding and building community. It's clear to me, hearing her speak, the recognition of cultural rights is essential in achieving social cohesion, or even more so, empowerment. Alexandra says something that really sticks with me. We need to recognize that cultural rights means the rights to one's way of life. And one's way of life is made up of many elements. One that's particularly important to the cohesion of communities is welfare.
The marketplace in Barcelona is a chaotic and buzzing place. Researchers and projects gather in the El Parallel Theatre to exhibit their work. The whole situation is structured like a marketplace, where everyone has their own stand. In the tumult, we have an appointment with Gaia Raisoni, researcher and project manager at YED, European Institute of Design. She is there quietly at her stand, talking to all the people who approach. While approaching her, I think that there is a pleasant taste in being able to speak your native language, Italian, while everyone around you is chatting in English. I managed to take Gaia aside. I have a lot of questions for her because her research is very special. In it, she tells of a change that is taking place, mainly recorded in Scandinavian countries. The cultural welfare arrival, as she calls it, means a new dialogue between cultural and health professionals, especially at the level of policymaking. In alliance with local communities, the aim is to multiply the extent of health-promoting factors and make them accessible. What is even more interesting is the other side of the spectrum Gaia opposes in cultural welfare. What is this cultural warfare that Gaia talks about in her research?
Talking about my historic past, I study history and politician studies for my undergraduate. I made a reflection. In the first years of this century, wars and aggression were at the order of the days. There was this type of terrorism that was usually discussed and analyzed as a cultural war between two different cultures, Western and Arab, religions, Christianity versus Islam, and ways of life, right versus wrong. Instead of promoting a more inclusive approach to relations between different people, the natural reaction has been to separate, identify the best, and fight. History seems to repeat itself over and over again. The ancient Romans and Greeks before them saw Minerva or Athena as both the goddess of war and the culture and arts. This dichotomy can be difficult to understand, but it involves the first principle inside starting a war, imposing one's culture on others. And in small cities in particular, no one seems to recognize the importance of a systemic measure that links art and culture with sustainability, public health, and security. So creativity and design thinking, in my opinion, are the facilitator of cultural welfare, involving, in this sense, our communities.
And with the times we are going through, with war on our very doorstep, with social conflicts becoming stronger, and the ever-evolving role of political division in our societies, Gaia's words echo even more. She says that, in a way, we are still under a regime of cultural warfare, but approaches are changing. In her conversation with Marco, she gives us a few key examples underlining the process for communities.
I think that after the Bataclan attack in Paris, the Italian government proposed a very innovative solution. It was called 1 Year in Security, 1 Year in Culture. It was an initiative that was an incredible impact. For the first time, culture was seen as a solution to a problem, not a waste of public money. And I think that the cultural welfare nowadays can replace the cultural warfare, in particular with some good example. For example, in Bruxelles, is acquiring a role of protagonist. There is a 5-month pilot project involving people with mental problems that are involved in visiting municipal museums as medical orders. Or we can, for example, share the example of some performing arts inside the hospital. And also in Italy, Compagnia di San Paolo developed in the last 10 years quite 400 projects in the northwest of Italy, aiming to enhance the role of creativity and culture in the well-being process. So to make a cultural welfare really applicable, we need a policymaker able to think out of the box, putting at the same table health and care professionals with cultural professionists and artists.
The idea of bringing together policymakers, healthcare professionals, and cultural agents to the same table is something I've heard a lot about recently, given that Culture Action Europe is leading on the Culture for Health project, which advocates for cultural and wellness projects, like the ones Gaia mentioned, to be considered at the policy level. Among other things, Gaia is advancing the idea of a government-wide commission to deal with the concept of cultural welfare. It would mean really addressing the challenges of this time.
The well-being of citizens should be the aim of each government. Cultural welfare, in my opinion, can provide it, but how we can realize this? To facilitate this evolution, we need to use a roundtable, open not only at specific categories of professional and other resources, but policymakers have to learn from professionals far away from their background to change their mind and apply innovation in the policy. Design thinking can facilitate this process, in my opinion, but of course we need a collaborative approach along all our countries. I think that Europe can work together in this direction. Cultural welfare can become a topic inside the European Commission policy, in my opinion. And we hope that collaboration among countries continue in this direction.
I'm flipping through my notebook that I took with me to the conference. It's full of scribbles, some diary entries about the minutiae of my travels, but it's also full of notes from the sessions of the conference itself. Some of the quotes I forgot to attribute to a speaker, so they just appear on the page as puffs of someone's profound thoughts. Things like, "We need to claim and exercise our cultural rights," and "We need cultural hard power to recognize other and all forms of knowledge. More freedom and responsibilities for all." I have no idea who said these things, but I'm glad I was inspired to write it in the moment. Something in the margins catches my eye. Another quote that says, "You not only need transformative policies, but you also need politics. We are missing our political responsibility." The word politics is in all capital letters and underlined. I was clearly receiving the message during the panel. Luckily, I see that this quote does in fact have an owner. Luca Bergamo, the city of Rome's former vice mayor and deputy mayor for cultural development.
As I'm sitting listening to a conference, a person from behind chats with his peers in Spanish. He says, "The way this man talks, I would feel like voting for him, even without knowing what he's talking about." And indeed, it is immediately apparent that Luca, on stage, has the savoir-faire of a politician. It is probably the characteristic that has enabled him to achieve what he has achieved politically. The day after Luca's speech, I am waiting in the lobby of his hotel. It is 10:30 a.m., and strangely there are not many cars around. When he arrives, he sits down and immediately a point-blank question. I ask him who is left out of culture. Luca stares into my eyes, adjusts his jacket, and immediately starts talking.
Let's put it this way. Everyone, to some extent, participate in cultural life. At the same time, a large majority is not entitled to be actively part of the process, which leads to the community cultural evolution. And naturally, there are layers and layers. Let's say that in Western world, the majority can enjoy some form of cultural life, from tribal rituals to listening to the radio. But in most cases, except with the tribal, it's being the position of a consumer of something that is out of your reach, which is not participation. You can access to cultural expressions as a consumer, but you're not participating in the cultural life, and you're not participating in the cultural life of the community, at least as an active participant.
At this point, given the straightforward manner in which he expresses himself, I want to ask him a basic question. What is his definition of participation in culture? And Luca says a fundamental thing. It is not about being obliged to participate in cultural life, but rather the fact of having no obstacles to be able to do so. And he starts talking about the real obstacles that there can be.
No way you had in the past 70 years an even distribution of the cultural opportunity. So the physical distances are a barrier. Because if you have to drive 30 kilometers of urban traffic to get to do an activity that the society consider as, extras, when you already spend a couple hours of your time, living time, in traffic, you are in different conditions. There are barriers for you to access. As there is barrier for access of those living in rural area with the urbanization. Then there are financial barrier. And the reason I decided to, as an example in Rome, to issue a card that allows all the residents in the metropolitan area at €5 per year to enter anytime they want in the network of civic museum, which implies the Foro and Capitolini, so big things, okay, big war things. It was also to contrast an approach. The approach is that you consider that kind of the heritage and certain kind of cultural services are instrumental to tourism, not as a part of the generation of your local life.
During the panel, Luca, who has also served as a Secretary General of Culture Action Europe from 2012 to 2016, mentioned the need for politics, not just policies, when it comes to guaranteeing cultural rights. So, what does the political responsibility of the cultural sector look like to him? It shouldn't come as a shock that his answer starts with a strong statement.
I don't like the very notion of cultural sector. Defining it as the cultural sector implies not fully accepting the magnitude of the meaning of the word culture, the implication. If you think to very basic things, biological things of our lives, giving birth of that, and you look at what we have built in different societies with different civilizations around that, you can certainly say that birth and death are totally cultural and totally biological. So if we do not embrace this notion of culture, we cannot truly understand the implication, the value of Article 27 of the Declaration of Human Rights. The issue at stake is the right for every human expression respecting certain values to exist. The issue does not concern those that produce arts or the creative industry at large, but it concerns the society. Being a societal issue, it has to come at very high level in the political priority. So you need to be political. It's not just making, envisaging or structuring policy that entrust, protect, allow, promote the cultural expression through the arts and whatever, which is fundamental. But it's not the totality of the issue.
And maybe this is why I made a point to jot down Luca's words during his panel. The work of advocating culture as a right is to communicate and establish culture as fundamental to our society. And maybe what I'm understanding better as I listen to the conversation Marco and Luca had is that ensuring cultural rights is not only about making culture accessible and breaking down barriers for participation, but also affecting things systemically so that culture is perceived as the integral part of our society that it truly is. I look across the theater, which we have now in almost record time transformed into a marketplace where super motivated people have gathered to share their interesting projects and research from across Europe. I see now how culture as an integral part of society is not without the voices of those who are shaping it. And, especially when there are many forces at play pushing communities into the margins, making a space to really listen to those voices may be exactly where the systemic change needs to happen.
3-day conference, 3 days of meetings, chatting, interviewing with dozens and dozens of people. As I'm on the plane, I realize that I'm missing one last interview, that of my colleagues at Michael Culture, to talk about the MEMEX project. This Horizon 2020 project helps promote social cohesion and inclusivity through the use of collaborative digital tools connected to European cultural heritage. These tools allow communities to tell their stories, create and visualize geolocalized storylines, and annotate physical and intangible locations with personal memories. I breathe a sigh of relief. I know that with Maud, our communication manager at MCA, it will be easy to find the time to record. In the spirit of the cooperation of European projects, we also ask Ines from the DAL to join the conversation. The DAL is an agency that specializes in urban and social innovation and was in charge of the pilot project in Paris at MEMEX. We planned the interview in our offices in Paris. It's February, and Barcelona seems so far in time and place. A timid ray of sunshine comes in our busy office. We start talking about MEMEX. The project, which ended at the end of 2022, rested on 3 pilot projects in 3 different cities. The common point, all 3 were built with communities that appeared excluded from cultural participation. In Barcelona with communities of migrant women. In Lisbon with first-generation migrants. While in Paris, the DAL and MCA worked with residents of a priority area, the Rosa Parks neighborhood. Maud points out why this kind of communities were chosen to co-create the project.
The common issue with these 3 communities is that the people are in a precarious situation, meaning that due to their origin, gender, social class, or any other factor, they do not have culture as a priority. I think working with fragile communities is about understanding that they might have priorities in their needs and that culture might not be the first one. So I'll take the example of the Paris pilot. We had a lot of inhabitants with different types of profiles, but they were all facing social exclusion in a way, unemployment, social fragility, security, food problem, lack of facilities in the area, etc., etc. In this context, I don't think culture and cultural participation in any way was a priority for them, but it doesn't mean that they don't experience it from time to time.
And these kinds of projects that interact directly with people in communities and build through and with them have been greatly impacted by COVID. Ines tells me that MEMEX had to completely revise its methodology and mobilization plan for collecting stories.
What we did is that we multiplied mobilization strategies. So we contacted all the different stakeholders that were part of the project, and ask for their help, but knowing that the facilities were closed to the public as well. So we mostly mobilized on public space. So we went outdoors and we reached out to people in parks during outdoors events, and that was really a success. People were present to these workshops, and it allowed us to continue fostering the relationship we had with these participants. So basically, what the COVID did to the project is that, so we used more digital tools first, and then second, we had to adapt our methodology, and we shifted from group workshops to more individual workshops. So we had to multiply as well the number of workshops.
The project had one focal point: to develop the prototype of an application that would allow participants to create stories, sharing their memories and thoughts related to cultural assets in the neighborhoods under consideration.
In a map of the area, the different areas that we had, so Barcelona, Paris, and Lisbon. And you also had the possibility to connect stories according to the topics that were mentioned from one city to another. So later on, the partners who worked on the app implemented different types of features to, let's say, make it more dynamic. So you had the possibility to connect in the same area different stories to create like a journey and walk around the area. And then you had the possibility to visualize with augmented reality the different stories and linked assets from Wikidata when walking around. So what we learned from the Memex experience is to involve communities in the development of the technologies that we were working on. So we did invite them to ideation and co-design workshop at the beginning to like kind of shape the app. And then we invited the different communities in the different cities to come and test the app through the different releases. And that's one key takeaway that we can have from like the digital in Memex is to involve the communities, not leaving them out, and like bring them at the heart of the co-design process.
Memex has been a long project. At MCA, it was the first European project I came into contact with, and its specificity lies precisely in being a large-scale project. I asked Ines what she thinks is the main advantage of a project like this, especially in developing a conversation with local communities.
Implementing a European project in a popular neighborhoods such as Rosa Parks was really important because it gave us the means to engage in a long-term relationship with the participants. And as I said, cultural heritage is really subjective to anyone. The project wasn't going to change their lives like an urban project would, for example. The European project structure gave us the means to mobilize first long-term, and then not to mobilize a large quantity of people. It allowed us really to take the time with each participant because we had the budget, because we had the time allocated as well. So it allowed us to take our time when it comes to community participation. It's not an easy task. The clarity of a European project also guided the relationship with the participants. What a European project allows you to do is to scale up and to tackle subjects that are shared by millions of European citizens, but also to scale down and to work with a small group of persons and to meet their needs as well.
This is exactly the type of project that inspires me and makes me really motivated about the work that I do. I think about accessibility a lot. Is the language I'm using understandable to everyone? Do I need to communicate in other ways than language? Are the types of projects I'm working on useful, sustainable to the communities they aim to serve? I'm really provoked by the Memex project because it does what I think a good community-focused project should do. Take the time to listen and let people claim their space in the discussion. Even though it's always kind of awkward to reread your diary, I do see something in the pages that catches my eye. I actually remember writing it during one of the sessions when I was tucked into a far corner of the theater in one of the red velvet seats. I wrote, "There is something invigorating about exhaustion. Exhaustion at the expense of doing and making and helping and learning. It's like performing on a stage. All of the hours you put into practicing and failing, and then creating and recreating, and then the energy it takes to go out in front of an audience, and maybe even fail then, but maybe also do well. And then when the concert is over, you are so tired, but you've also made something that you're really proud of. You've shared it with your community, and they've taken something away from it too. And this immeasurable reciprocity fuels your motivation to create new connections with the work and the people around you. I want to be exhausted with this type of energy." And besides taking away that I was obviously a bit tired when I wrote it, I can also see that in that sleepy little note, I was reflecting on all the ways we talked today about participating in culture. To culturally express myself the way I want, to have my cultural welfare protected, to be a part of a system that sees my work, and to claim my space in the discussion. These are all of our rights, and it's comforting to know that there are so many people willing to fight for them. This podcast is a collaboration between Michael Culture Association and Culture Action Europe, two network organizations working towards sustainable, diverse, and central spaces for culture. The 4-part series is designed and edited by Maya Weisinger from Culture Action Europe and Michael Fiore from MCA. You can find the link for the sources in the description of this episode. For any comment or suggestion about these episodes, please write to Maya, M-A-Y-A, at cultureactioneurope.org.
Thank you for listening, and thanks to all the interviewees for participating in the making of this episode. The next episode will be about cultural work and sustainability. See you in the next episode of Tales from Culturopolis.